May the Lord give us hearing ears and hearts to respond to Him today. Recently, while rummaging through some photos and memorabilia, I happened on a one-line title from a newspaper, and that's all there is of the clipping, just the title, announcing Suzanne's and my engagement back in 1963, a long time ago. The key to understanding this title, produced, by the way, by a very talented reporter, I think, to come up with this clever statement. Well, let me go back. The key was understanding that Suzanne grew up on a chicken ranch, and her parents had developed this business over several years. And I think at this time, if I remember correctly, or, well, I may not remember correctly. But anyway, it seems to me that there were something between 5,000 and 7,000 chickens on their property, and that was considered a small farm at that time. And even as time went on, that was more true. They processed the eggs there at what they called the plant, and then they delivered the eggs. They had several drivers went throughout either San Bernardino or Los Angeles counties, delivering eggs to markets, and that was a business, a very demanding one at that. Well, what this statement said, and it may take you a moment to grasp what this was written here, were these words: "A honeymoon hatches on a chicken ranch." And that was our beginning. One of those special memories. Not so much this title, because I don't remember having seen it before, but it was in our stuff, or Suzanne's stuff. Well, as I think of Suzanne, it's been almost 2 years ago that she passed into the Lord's presence, leaving behind multiple memories in letters or yearbooks or calendars or photos or little objects that she collected through the years. And it made me think of, as she was in her last month, I believe, in this world, in this life, this picture was available. I don't know if you can see it clearly, but she's in bed, but she's also welcoming little Ocean, Sam's daughter, and just a reminder of her love for kids and family and all of that. This is among many memories of her life. We were, what was it, close to 58, no, over 58 years married this time. And I'm thankful for the life we had together, and thankful for the memories as well, even though it brings up certain emotions and feelings that are sometimes difficult to deal with. At the same time, the fulfillment of Jesus' words in his Sermon on the Mount blessed me in so many ways. And I think you'll guess what this may be. When Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Once upon a time, I took a correspondence course on worship service preparation. And it was a very helpful course, and I don't know how much of it shows today, but it's been helpful for me in my thinking and planning, and more so when I was in the pastoral roles. And one of the key statements that was made in this course that has stuck with me is simply this: say one thing and say it well. Say one thing and say it well. And this applied not only to the sermon preparation, but to the planning of a service. like we're experiencing now. And since I wasn't the one that planned this service, I can't say I practiced this here exactly, but it has been a helpful way to think. It was great to name and help me plan and implement more meaningful services through music and scripture, sometimes skits or testimonies, and of course a sermon. So it was not just 3 points in a poem that we taught in Bible school about preparing for sermons. Have 3 points in a poem and you've got it made. Naturally, coming up with the one thing in a sentence for today is frequently one of the most challenging preparation items that a pastor has to deal with, including yours truly. But fortunately today, we have that one thing said well that comes from Jesus himself. And this is found in Matthew chapter 5 and the early part of the Sermon on the Mount. And I wanted to read part of this for you and especially focus on one particular verse. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside, and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And by the way, you may not remember, and I've had trouble resurrecting this too. This was the subject of a sermon I gave back in May, of all times. So I want to continue with the next beatitude, as it's called, in verse 3, where it says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Usually this passage, which is called the Sermon on the Mountain, or a Sermon on the Mount, I guess is the shortened form, is a valuable record of what Jesus preached. Now, Matthew gives us a pretty expanded form that covers 3 chapters, 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew. And it's probably Matthew's way of remembering what Jesus did teach. And though he may not have taught every single item as it is given here, Matthew's memory was such, maybe he heard it often enough that he remembered enough to write it down. Can you imagine? 3 chapters worth of sermon. Luke also gives part of the Sermon on the Mount, but not nearly as expanded as Matthew's. And as I say, Matthew presented a overview of the sermon today. And I'm going to take that verse, or those who mourn, for they will be comforted, and pick up the 3 major words that are used there. And the first one is the word blessed or blessed. Blessed is the most frequent translation of the original word that Jesus used. In fact, it's times in the New Testament translated blessed or blessed. And there are other translations also. One is the word happy, which is very appropriate, or fortunate. And I've even seen some translations where they'll use the word lucky. That's probably for us not too particularly appropriate, because luck tends to cause us to think about chance, or it just happened, and not focusing on the source. And then English definitions include the words bliss of heaven, bringing pleasure, or even content, or good future. So it's a very full term that Jesus uses here. Blessed. It has the idea of pronouncing fortune on another. And we have gotten a glimpse of that in Brian's recent messages, where he talks about the blessings that were received by the patriarchs, including Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. They were all blessed, and they pronounced blessings. But it has the idea of invoking special care and care, and conferring prosperity. This is our desire. This is what Jacob received, for example, even though he did it through appropriate means, we could say. The one thing that's significant about this word is that, and the way it's stated, is that when you say blessed are those, you're giving the sense, we're given the sense that Jesus intended that we understand that receiving blessing indicates there must be a blesser, that is God himself. And so we're fortunate, in one sense, to be blessed with God's pronouncement of wanting contentment or prosperity or goodness to apply to his people. And I appreciate that he's the one who we are blessed by. And again, we think of how this is described in many ways in the scriptures. The second word that's important in this particular beatitude is the word mourn. If I can get that to come up. Let's try it. Here we go. And this is usually a response to some kind. And we can list a lot of things. Usually, and more often, it's probably applied to someone mourning or having feelings of grief when there's a death or loss of physical or health abilities, for example, loss of possessions in some way can happen, or loss of a relationship. At those times, we tend to mourn. Or we sometimes mourn experiencing some kind of failure in life. Or for those of us who have or had pets, we also will mourn at their loss, their being absent from us. It may be in reference to a loss of a job or a profession or a total change in lifestyle, and we can tend to grieve and mourn over those kinds of situations. Right? And while we often refer to someone's death, the term applies to a lot of things that can happen to us in our lives. Therefore, mourning really has a broader meaning and application than only the loss through death. But it's probably the primary thing we think of when we mourn or grieve. And then the third word that is used by Jesus in this statement is the word comfort. And it's a state of physical ease or freedom from pain, or some kind of constraint, or to call to one side and address or speak to. And that latter part is very important when we think of comfort, because Jesus here is stating that we receive comfort from God through times of mourning and grief, and that's how he blesses us. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall receive comfort. And I especially appreciate the concept that means his very presence is available to us to help us go through times of mourning. Now, one of the things that came to mind that I want to continue to discuss has to do with, well, that why question. Have you ever asked why? If I remember correctly, that's one of the early questions that our kids used with us. Maybe the same happened with you, who are parents, that you would get the question, well, why? And you'd give an answer, because, and then they'd say, but why? And again, because. And we finally end up saying, just cause. We don't know how to continue because it never stops. But it's an important question to ask. Why did Jesus say this? Why did he bring into this conversation that he had with people in his sermons that blessed are those who mourn, of all things? And the reason is he wants to bless us. But also behind that is something else. He was addressing a human experience. He was talking about reality, what occurs in life. There are occasions when we are affected by mourning when we lose something or someone in our lives, and we have certain feelings that help us, or that we take on. He knew what he was talking about. This is another answer to the why question. He knew what people experience, and he saw it. And he personally experienced many episodes of mourning. For example, when he saw people dealing with illnesses and suffering, or handicaps, or even death. I think in particular of the occasion when Jesus came across a widow who had lost her son, and how she was grieving at that moment. He understood what she was going through. But he himself also experienced what it was like to grieve when his friend Lazarus suddenly died, and left behind the two sisters, Martha. Short statement, and he wept. Jesus wept. He was grieving, mourning. He knew what he was talking about because he, as a human being, as well as being God himself, experienced human experiences, including mourning. And I believe as we look at the events surrounding before he died, the status, as you remember, that he wept over the city of Jerusalem as he went into it just a week before he himself was crucified. Whether they were Jews or Gentiles. He approached the cross, I'm sure, with feelings of grief, and no doubt was part of what he was praying, not just for himself, but also for the people for whom he was giving his life. And think too, as he on the cross remembered those joining him in death, as it were, and promised that when the man asked, wanted to see him in heaven, in paradise, I'm sure he mourned as he saw the witnesses around him as he was in the process of dying, and he grieved too, I'm sure, for the perpetrator of crucifixion, those who physically put him on the cross. He knew what he was talking about. That's one of the key things that I believe we can take from this statement. Blessed are those who mourn. He knew what it was like to mourn. They will be comforted. They will be comforted. And he was. In fact, he stated, in Hebrews, that he anticipated the joy of the cross, even though it was very difficult to go through. The availability of his presence is a key way that God blesses us at times of mourning. Um, I can't help but remember in the closing months of Suzanne's life, how frequently, and I don't know how this came about, how frequently as we prayed together, that the subject of our praying was thanksgiving for the presence of God through that time, which was, in a sense, a time of mourning for both of us prior to her actually passing. And to realize that the presence of God was there to enable us to process and go through the difficult times was one of the key reasons why Jesus appropriately said words like these: "Blessed are those that mourn, for they will receive comfort." There's another thought that comes to mind as far as the why, answering the why question. It's not just the availability of His presence, but the fact that we can have a part in being people who can help others go through times of mourning, because we know what we're talking about and can just be there for those moments for someone else. More than once I've heard people appreciate at the time of a loss having someone just be there. They may not say much or anything, but just to have someone there was a source of comfort for them. I can say the same in our case, in my case. That God is blessed with people that God has prepared to be a provider of comfort for us. Which brings me to some closing thoughts here. How should I respond to this that Jesus said, which is so important? The first thing, and I think Jesus illustrates this for us, is to come to the place in our thinking, and it may be a process itself, of accepting the causes for mourning, accepting losses and realizing that they are part of life. We do have this tendency to think about that life should be, we say life should be good, and there should be no things that would be harmful or disappointing or that would create mourning and grieving. Reality says, yep, we have to go through these kinds of things. That's what Jesus was reminding through His words. But we should also recognize that the comfort God provides is His presence, His being with us through times of grief and mourning. And will you do that, even though it may be recurring, and you think, oh, I'll get over it? And it doesn't always happen. And sometimes our grieving can go on through the end of our lives, perhaps. But it's He who is there with us, and we need to recognize this. And will you accept His presence and that of others to help you deal with the mourning that you may be experiencing? And the third thing is to, would you accept opportunities to be a source of comfort for those needing it? And I close with these words from the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, where he writes, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ." God wants us to be channels that will be available to offer comfort to those that need it. And I want to encourage those occasions that make your way, even when you don't know what to say or do particularly, but just being there as God does for us is a valuable source of comfort for those who need it. The other day I was watching an interview on of a couple of fellows. I noticed in the background of one of the participants that there was a plaque or framed wording that caught my attention, and it was, of course, in light of my preparations for these thoughts, that was a very simple thing. He says, "You are blessed to be a blessing. Blessed to be a blessing." And this is something to help us deal with our own grief, because God has put us in a situation or situations where we can express our gratitude to Him for being a comfort and then allowing us to do the same. So I leave these thoughts with us and pray that God will lead us to know how to respond appropriately to receive His comfort in those times when we are mourning as well. Would you come and lead us in the closing song?